All right, we're good to go.
All right. Well, good morning. Just want to let everybody know this is the ICG meeting that's going to begin prior to the TAC meeting at the same link. This should be fairly brief. So thank you all for attending this virtual meeting. The TAC meeting will begin following this meeting. We are here to kick off conformity on the Richmond area 2045 long range plan and 24 to 27 tip. We'll review the membership list, and I'll be seeking your approval for the conformity schedule and the project list. So the Richmond area was previously listed as maintenance for the 1997 Ozone National Ambient Air Quality Standard. That standard was revoked by the EPA in 2015. However, a 2018 court ruling that became effective in February of 2019 reinstated regional conformity requirements in the Richmond area. In November of 2018, EPA issued guidance for conducting conformity under the revoked 1997 standard. And under the EPA guidance, transportation conformity can be demonstrated now without a regional emissions analysis. Conformity can now be demonstrated by meeting those remaining items under the regulation for the Richmond area, which include the consultation process and projects that are from a currently conforming tip and plan. ICG membership is specified only by the agency. Their current consultation procedures were approved in October of 2005. And consultation is required on the schedule and project list used for conformity. We want to make sure that the list we use indicates whether our project is reasonably significant. This is the most recent ICG list. I think we had some designated staff change since the last time we did conformity. So take a look and let me know if you have any changes to this list. All right, I'll move on. This is the geographical area for the former 8-hour ozone maintenance area. That includes portions of both the Richmond and Tri-Cities MPOs. This is the current schedule. The draft report will go to the Richmond TAC following this meeting, and then the Tri-Cities TAC on March 17th for approval to submit for public review beginning on the 21st. Any adverse comments will be addressed, and then in May, we'll be seeking MPO approval to submit to FHWA. And we expect to receive a final determination by the end of June, if not earlier. I'm just opening it up now to discussion on the project list. Hopefully everybody's had time to review that list. We want to focus on making sure that projects that are regionally significant are listed as so on that list. Does anyone have any comments on the project list? All right, I will move on. We also have a time for public comment period. There will also be a time during the public review period for the public to comment on the draft analysis. Is there anyone here from the public?
We have not received any requests or written comments.
Okay. All right, now we'll move on. So I'm seeking your approval of the membership. We don't have any updates to it. The conformity schedule and the project list that was sent out with the draft report in Appendix B. So I would like to make a motion to approve. Do I have a second?
Second.
Do we know who made the second?
Ron did. Gary Mitchell. You can choose.
I think we had two, so that's
you
good.
Can choose, Dan.
That's it.
We had an approval and a second. Is there any further discussion? I would ask everybody in favor to say aye.
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 Any opposed? Very good. I think that concludes the meeting.
Thank you.
Ken and Jim.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you. All right, good morning, folks. Thanks for joining in for that first meeting. And I call this Richmond Regional Transportation Planning Organization Technical Advisory Committee meeting to order. Today is Tuesday, March 14th. It is 9:14 a.m. And Ms. Firestone, will you please take roll call and certify a quorum?
Yes, ma'am. Town of Ashland, Miss Amos.
Here.
Charles City County, Mr. Mitchell.
Here.
Ms. Russell. Chesterfield County, Ms. Smith.
Here.
Ms. Walker.
Here.
Goochland County, Mr. Goin.
Here.
Mr. Coleman. I believe we have Mr. Coleman. I'm not sure if he's having audio problems.
Here.
Thank you. Hanover County, Mr. Vidunez.
Here.
Mr. Flagg. Henrico County Chair Smidler.
Here.
Mr. Yor. New Kent County, Miss Inman.
Here.
Miss Leduc. Powhatan County, Mr. Shardine. City of Richmond, Miss Clark.
Good morning. Here.
Good morning. Capital Region Airport Commission, Mr. Rutledge. DRPT, Ms. Dubinsky.
Here.
Mr. Wagner. GRTC, Ms. Sink. Mr. Robinson.
Here.
Ms. Robinson.
Here.
Plan RBA, Mr. Parsons.
Here.
Mr. Ariel.
Present.
Ride Finders, Ms. Tisdale. Mr. O'Keefe.
Here.
RMTA, Ms. Simmons. VDOT, Ms. McAdory. Ms. Mueller.
Here.
Thank you. That concludes the roll call for attendance, and we do have a quorum.
Thank you, Ms. Firestone. Next on the agenda is number 3, consideration of amendments to the agenda. Are there any amendments to the agenda? I have one proposed amendment for number 10 to make that an action item. It's project cost estimating and overruns.
Madam Chair, we have a second request from staff, which is to change item 12 to an information item.
Okay. Are there any other amendments? So we have number 10, project cost estimating and overruns to change from a discussion item to an action item. And number 12, fiscal year 24, fiscal year 29, STBG CMAQ allocations changed from an action item to an informational item. I make that motion to change those. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second from Gary Mitchell. Can we just do voice vote?
Yes, please.
All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Any who are not in favor? All right, hearing none, those amendments to the agenda are made. Number 4 on the agenda is approval of the February 14th, 2023 TAC meeting minutes. This is a voice vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Anyone need to abstain?
I'll abstain since I was absent.
Okay. Mr. Goin will abstain. Any nays? All right, hearing none. That leads to number 5, open public comment period. Let me check the Q&A. Do not see any. I do not see anything in the chat either. Ms. Firestone, have we received any comments beforehand?
No, ma'am, we haven't.
Thank you. All right, we will move on to number 6, TAC Chairman's report. Chet will probably cover this with RRTPO update, but just wanted to remind folks the Transportation Forum is this Friday at Main Street Station from 8 to 10. There are links on Plan RVA's webpage. And on Wednesday, there is, it's like an online through Chamber RVA. It's called RVA Engage, Transportation, Why It Matters, and what you can do. A few of us on TAC are serving on the panel. Chet, myself, Dirona, and their sports backers, GRTC is serving on there. And I think that's also listed on Plan RVA's social media. And it may be on their webpage, a link to that if you would want to register to participate online. So that's all I had for the TAC Chairman's report. Next up, number 7 is the RRTPO update. Mr. Parsons.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You took both of my items, so we're going to keep it short and be able to move on. I will offer that we'll put the links for both of those events in the chat for anybody that hasn't registered. I think it's especially important for Friday if you plan to be there, just so we make sure that we have and all the necessary materials in place for in-person attendees. So, thank you.
Thank you. All right, number 8 is an informational item. 2050 Socioeconomic Data Work Group update from Mr. Ariel.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the TAC. Let me share my screen. I have a very brief presentation. Can everybody see my screen now?
Yes.
Okay. So as we all know, we are developing the 2050 socioeconomic data, keeping the same base year 2017 because of COVID implications. And I presented to the TAC some time back. As per now, we have the 2050 control totals for both population and employment, which has been vetted by the localities. The 2050 was basically developed using the Weldon-Cooper threshold, and localities were given 10% plus minus variance. And overall, I think most of the localities agreed with what Weldon-Cooper has projected for 2050, but there were slight changes. Overall, only I think region-wide, it was 2% more than what Weldon-Cooper has projected for 2050. So if we look at from 2017 to 2050, there's a 30% growth in the Richmond region, which is more than what the Virginia average is. Just compared with Tidewater, it's just 17% out there. For employment, again, the employment projections were developed by Plan RVA and a model developed by Sumara Economics using Plan RVA's model and the data which we had developed in previous socioeconomic data, and looks at the historic and local, regional, and national shift share trends in the 2-digit NICS codes. And it was basically developed by combining the 2-digit sectors. So the 2-digit sectors for each localities were first developed, and then it was aggregated to get the localities total. So overall, we can see that there's 30% overall growth from 2017 to 2050 for employment. So once the locality weighted with that number, the next step was to allocate those growth control totals into TAZs, looking at the growth pattern and what is anticipated, and looking at the pipeline activities, redevelopment potential, rezoning potential, and other things like that, looking at mostly aligning with the comp plans. We allocated the population and employment to those TAZs and then provided that to the localities for the vetting. As you can see that We already have got approval from 5 localities on the distribution of the TAZs. The big 3, Richmond, Henrico, and Chesterfield, still working on it. And I hope that we'll finalize the data soon. The tentative schedule upon when the data would be vetted by the localities is that we'll have a socioeconomic work group meeting late March or early April. So once they approve the data, we'll come for the TAC, tentatively for next TAC meeting, but let's see how it goes. And then once TAC approves it, it'll go to the policy board. May 4th is the tentative day. So that's all I have. Just a brief update. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Madam
Thank you.
Chair,
Yes.
just a quick reminder, I know that Sulab is working closely with Hanover, Henrico, and Richmond on getting the approvals, but I would ask each of the representatives on TAC to make sure that you're touching base with the folks who are directly doing the work and make sure that that this gets the attention it needs so we can get the work group scheduled later this month. Thanks.
Noted. Any questions for Mr. Ariel? All right, hearing none. Chet, thank you for posting the registration information in the chat for RBA Engage for the Wednesday webinar and the transportation forum on Friday morning. Number 9 on the agenda is an informational item. It is competitive funding opportunities by Ms. Jaycox.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair and members of TAC. Really happy to be here today. I am going to share my screen as well. And everyone see that?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, excellent. So I wanted to start off by putting this informational item in context with our larger strong renewal of our data projects and data competencies. As you can see, we're working, of course, in transportation. You all well know that, in the environmental realm, as well as emergency management. And with the addition of Saren Atikari and some data analysts to help Sulab and others who are already on the team, we have the added advantage this year of having a Wilder Fellow with us, Trinity Waldron. And I'm going to hope that she is showing her face as well, because she has done a lot of work on this special project that we're going to just give you an introduction to today. She is working on her master's in planning and will be graduating in May. So this, let me advance so we can start talking about the subject of our meeting. I'm sorry, I'm trying to advance from the wrong screen. There we go. So this idea was put in our heads by Austin Goyne when we met with him in Goochland at the end of last year to start thinking about what are some ways that we can tap into this building a better America, the otherwise known as the Infrastructure and Investment and Jobs Act. There is a plethora of federal and state funding available. $550 billion of new funding over the next 5 years, $350 billion of that in federal highway funds. So how can we provide a tool for our localities to better research other funding from state and federal sources, to advance their projects and programs faster? I listened into the CVTA TAC meeting yesterday, and I know you all are very pragmatic and strategic in accomplishing your projects, and certainly are very creative. So we wanted to try to help provide a resource, a ready resource for you to be able to use. And also, how do we really research, what we're better positioned to obtain in terms of the more competitive federal programs. And as you can see, there are over 100 new funding programs that have been created, and not just for transportation, but for all sorts of, for broadband, for many, many resiliency types of programs that we're taking advantage of and want to be able to take advantage of over the next 5 years as we move forward. So I'm just going to give you, and I think it should be posted in the chat. I've asked Trinity to put the spreadsheet link from our website in the chat, and it's not intended for you to study it right now during this meeting, but for you to look at your leisure and provide us input. And how we organized the spreadsheet is by tabs, and we list them here. It's really just meant to be a quick reference guide, a resource. It gives you ready links to the programs and starts to provide some sense of what types of projects would be eligible for certain types of funding programs. If you look at the top, the purple bar, we start with, of course, and this is in the tier 1 tab, the state resources for transportation and for resiliency. And we've arranged it, and we've gotten a lot of advice from our full team, like Miles and Sulab, on how to best arrange this for easy navigation. But starting on a continuum of state sources with federal revenue sharing as being one of the most readily available, all the way through to the more competitive smart scale that we're all familiar with. Also provide a cross-section of the typical projects, the eligibility that we think exists within each of these programs by the notation of the $. Roadway projects, bridge, active transportation projects are featured here. And the next, sorry, keep getting off the wrong screen. And then we just provide under these same programs a little more description along with ready links for you to check on. There's a number of relevant links that might be beyond the program and sources for searching for additional eligibility and requirements, federal requirements or state requirements in this case. And then, of course, covering resiliency, some of the programs that are of interest to a lot of our colleagues in the environmental field. And now on to federal, the same, you can see at the top purple bar, you've got RAISE, the Safe Streets for All program, and others that we're well aware with of 22 different projects. This is not or programs. This is not meant to be an exhaustive list. We would welcome your input on others that you would find of interest, of course, to add to this. And then under federal transportation types of projects, there's a little bigger description of those programs with due dates. And then also we did provide, in some cases where applications have been submitted and they have been successful, we have downloaded those applications so they can be used as a guide for others to learn from. And then some more detail on federal resiliency types of programs, which I think are of interest to a lot of folks within our region. So it's not just all about transportation, but programs, resiliency, building better neighborhoods, and utilities as well. And then the final is just a notes section with some cross-cutting details on FHWA and DOT funding and how they all try to fit together. So this pretty much is what we would love for you to be able to use. Check into the link and look at it. Let us know of inaccuracies, things that were missing, or thoughts that you might have, or suggestions you might have to help in the navigation or the assessment of the tool. I'm thinking I'd love to get input onto how we go forward with this, because this is a work in progress always, because the climate and the landscape of state and federal funding is always changing. And I'm kind of thinking that it might be nice to have not just us trying to maintain it, but maybe a closed loop of editors that will help contribute to it, and also in a more forgiving platform than an Excel spreadsheet. So I would welcome those thoughts and inputs from each of you. We want to make this a useful resource. So I appreciate your time this morning and would welcome any questions right now and later.
Thank you for this tool, Barbara and Trinity. I see Tiffany has her hand raised.
Thank
Yes.
you. So I wanted to ask, since I know the focus of this was supposed to be on a locality level, did you still want to include transit grants, and both at a state and the federal level? So because I was looking through, and whether there's roadway projects, bridge, active transportation, other projects, there are some opportunities, at least at the state level, for something that's related to, and I know it's like more infrastructure, but if you want to, we could talk offline and I can give you some additional grants. At the federal level, there are some opportunities as well related to capital and infrastructure that we could highlight just in general for localities, kind of information if they're looking at some transit projects.
Oh, definitely. Thanks, Tiffany. We'd love to add more.
Sure.
You can become an editor as well if you'd like.
I don't know if you want to give me that, but I'll be glad to give you information.
Thanks so much. Yes, I would like that. And I know Trinity would. She's got a few more months to be working on this, along with a few other projects. Any other thoughts or comments, questions? Well, thank you for your time. I know you've got a long meeting agenda today, so I'll let you move on.
I just saw Nora raised her hand.
Oh,
Sorry.
Nora. Yeah, I can't see everybody on my screen, so Nora. You're muted, I think.
We can't hear you. You may not be muted, but I can't hear you. Maybe you could put it to the chat or just reach out to Barbara separately. I'm sure she'll be glad to assist. Joe?
Joe?
Real quickly, where again do we access this spreadsheet?
Is there a link in the chat?
Yes. Trinity put that in there.
Okay, I missed that. Thank you.
And I think it says WP TAC content.
Got it. Thank you.
Right. It's in there, just as a PDF for you all to review. But it's posted on our website.
Got it.
I will say, Joe, my intention is not for this to end up as a PDF.
Oh, right.
We want it to be
definitely
something that's more accessible and navigable. So we'd love any ideas or comments on ways to do that.
Definitely. That is what I want to look at next. What is the platform that we use and how do we make it the most useful?
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I'm just scrolling to make sure. Yeah, I don't see any other hands raised. Thanks again.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Number 10, project cost estimating and overruns. This is Mr. Bushing. And this is one where it it was a discussion item and we had an amendment to the agenda to change this to an action item. Mr. Bushing, please go ahead.
Sure. Good morning, Madam Chair, members of TAC. This is just a quick overview to reacquaint everyone with this topic. We've been discussing it for a few months. The policy board has been very interested in cost estimating and overruns for the past year, and they have directed the TAC to look at our funding program and our policies and really focus on two things: improving our cost estimating process and reducing the impacts of cost overruns. And those go hand in hand. So they've left it up to TAC to provide a recommendation on the best approach on how to handle this. The other piece of what was requested was a summary of, or an explanation of, the reason that the projects have increased in cost. Just yesterday, we got the last of those. So there's been an updated version posted online and sent out yesterday. But effectively, we have, I forget how many projects, 40 projects, and they all have an explanation now for why the cost has changed over the life of the project. From staff's quick review of that list, there were really four kind of things that stood out. Inadequate scoping or planning ahead of time. So sometimes projects were really defined after they were funded rather than the other way around. Inflation was one big thing that stood out kind of across the board. And part of this was in earlier project selection processes. We didn't account for inflation when programming funding. It was, your request was for a certain amount. That's the amount that was programmed. Scope changes. So some examples I listed here was like, a 4 to 6 lane becoming to 4 to 6 or 8 in some sections, or a signal and turn lane becoming a roundabout. So as the projects changed, obviously there were impacts on cost. And then just general delays. Some of these are unavoidable, but the issues with funding, utilities, right-of-way acquisition, railroad coordination, the whole range of potential issues there. But anything that led to delays obviously had impacts on cost as well. So those were kind of the four main areas that staff viewed as standing out and kind of repeating throughout different projects from different localities. Just as a reminder, some of these areas have had recent policy changes as part of the program. So for example, on the funding front, projects have to be fully funded now. Our approach is only to fully fund the project unless you're asking for just leveraging to go after smart scale or CVTA, or if you can demonstrate the funding has been provided from another source. So it's no longer get PE, then come back and get right away. It's now you get the whole project, or you get the remaining portion that you need, the balance that's needed. Changes in scope are no longer accepted to justify a change in cost. So if an applicant needs additional funding and the driver is a change to the scope of the project, that's something, as I mentioned last month, it's not defined anywhere of what constitutes a change, but it would come back to either the TAC or at the staff level. It could be determined that that wouldn't be eligible. Estimates are reviewed by VDOT now. So that is a second set of eyes on the cost estimates. We do defer to the localities for the locally administered projects to ultimately come up with the right number that should be used in determining funding. But it is a second set of eyes. And for VDOT administered projects, we do use VDOT's estimates. And then the other piece of it is projects are scored on a base estimate. So across the board, everyone's got the same baseline. But then inflation is factored in when we program the funds. So when we are, if PE can't start for 4 years, we want to make sure that there's an adequate inflation to account for the fact that you won't be getting to construction for a decade. So that is now factored in. The current approach is to use the inflation figures that are in the cost estimate workbook. Previously, staff didn't have access to PCES, so we didn't have that resource. But now we have the cost estimate workbook, so we can factor that in. Before that, we were really just using flat inflation, 3% every year kind of figures. So it wasn't as thought through as I think what's going into the cost estimate workbooks. So the options that were forwarded by the board for consideration were the top 4, and then obviously anything else that TAC identifies, but it was to use more conservative assumptions. So following along the lines of smart scale and using, risk-based estimates, and then also using potentially more conservative numbers like using VDOT estimates across the board. Number 2 was increasing project definition before selection. So that would be requiring a 10 or 30% design before the project could come into the RSTP or CMAQ program. Number 3 is reducing exposure. So that was effectively an option of only funding a portion of the project, whether it's a set dollar amount or only a single phase, so that even if the cost does increase over time, it doesn't have as much impact on the TPO's program. And the 4th option was to improve time to delivery. So really focusing on projects being funded to a specific schedule. That is somewhat in place in as much as funds have to be obligated within a year of allocation, but there are opportunities that we could improve that. So those were the options that were forwarded. Obviously, TAC can consider any other options that come out of the discussion as well. And the requested action is for TAC to develop a recommended policy change or changes to reduce the cost overruns and improve estimate quality, and provide that recommendation to the board. So with that, I'm happy to answer questions, but otherwise I'm just here to stay out of the way for the discussion.
Thank you, Miles. Do you mind going back to the slide with just the options? Yes, just to leave that on the screen for a minute. And I see Austin has his hand raised, and Miles, that was a great overview. And yes, I just want to give some background to that TPO, had tasked us with this. I've been talking about these concerns and tasked TAC with that in January, and we talked about it at our last meeting. And I think we've made great progress with, Miles helping summarize everything and coordinate among the localities for all the explanations for the cost overruns. And I think that's a great reason to present to TAC along with Miles' summary, not TAC, TPO, with what we found. And go ahead, Austin.
I was just going to say, I think the best case, hop back one slide, Miles, real quick. Thank you. The 3rd bullet about the estimates, I think it would be a good idea to use a similar approach that I know the CBTA TAC is considering for the guidelines. Is the cost estimating workbook is used across the board, which will provide at best the most apples to apples comparison for projects. And I think that workbook itself covers a lot of the overruns that I think we're seeing as far as not scope necessarily, but the years, the inflation, things like that.
Thank you, Austin. I agree. I think, presenting the TPO with the cost explanations and the summary of what Miles went over, and considering using the estimate. Gosh, I just lost the one, but basically the conservative assumptions, the cost estimating workbook would be a good solution to provide to TPO. I support that, but I want to open the floor to hear from others what their thoughts are. Amy, go ahead.
Good morning, everybody. Well, I guess, this is obviously a good carry-on discussion from the CBTA TAC conversation that we had yesterday. But I tend to agree that the VDOT workbook would be a good fundamental just base for everybody to use. I know the argument was made yesterday in CBTA TAC meeting about using the VDOT workbook. They tend to have higher costs in certain areas than the localities might wish, want to carry in terms of utility right away, that sort of thing. But as I'm looking at this, many of the explanations in all kind of localities here are saying that, well, it went from a locally funded project to a VDOT funded project. And so they're saying that's why we're having, 729% increase, on one. And then but that's not the only, there's others, major increases in costs because the locality decided to, go ahead and let VDOT administer the project. So I think I think there's just a compelling argument for across the board for everybody to utilize the cost estimate, the VDOT cost workbook. And then that way, if it isn't right, then everybody's cost estimates. It's not just, locally administered versus, VDOT administered, right? So at least we're on a level playing field. The other thing is I think if projects go on and on for decades, you need to kind of wonder why, right? And then project scopes are changing, 4,400%. That is a different project, right? So that's clearly a different project than what was originally brought into the program. Whenever, and there aren't dates here for when these projects were originally submitted and funded. I would like to see when, I think the TPO should see when these projects were originally funded. I think that's a healthy bit of information, not just cost escalation, but the fact that we're not getting these projects really administered to the point of where we can actually get them constructed. So I think we need to take a good hard look, even if they are locally administered, can these projects really be administered? Can they really, are we going to be able to get them constructed? And if not, then maybe they need to hold off on the project. So I think that needs to be a scoring criteria, is workload. Is a particular program oversubscribed within a locality? Can they really handle it? What is their capacity? These are all questions I think that start to come up when you see these projects that are 4,400%, 439% increase, 461% increase, 156% increase, 729, 120, 120. These are incredible increases, right? So I really think that we need to look at project management, the applicant's ability to actually complete the project when they're saying they can complete it, and everybody needs to use the same cost estimating workbook.
Okay, thank you for your feedback. I agree about the cost estimating workbook and kind of leveling the playing field, and especially if VDOT's administering it, that's the tool they use. As far as the originally funded, I remember seeing Miles present the TPO, like when they were originally funded. Miles, please feel free
I just
to
added the
elaborate or
link.
confirm.
I just added the link in the chat.
Okay.
So that's the summary document that was presented to the board. So it gives the entire project history all the way back to at least 2004, which is the earliest 6-year plan that's online. So it goes back as far as there's information available.
That's good. That's good. You might want to refresh their memory when you're going through this. Again, I think it's healthy, again, for people to understand and board members to understand that these projects have been around for a tremendous amount of time. And I'm not saying they're not still worthy projects, but I think you have to look at the underlying reason of why they have not been constructed. And why do we continue to carry projects that aren't being managed to construction? That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think, with the localities providing the reasons why, but also being able to speak to it if specific questions come up about a project. And I know we've been through this at previous TAC meetings just with some of the reasons, but I can speak for Henrico that, we've made a lot of changes, and, whether it be, starting with COTs or just to help expedite the process. And, now we're no longer allowing changes in scoping for, STBG CMAC and everything like that. Joe, your hand's raised. Go ahead.
Thank you, Sharon. Just a couple thoughts. I don't disagree that the cost estimating workbook balances things so that all estimates are using the same platform and using the same assumptions and so forth. But I think universally, most of us that are working with estimates, actually developing them, are not really pleased with the output. Overestimating, really what this item we're charged with is providing the most accurate estimates as possible, and not necessarily just developing estimates that are going to be under, or that are going to be projects that are going to come in at the end of the day under the estimated cost. So in other words, overestimating is also an issue as well. So I really think the solution to this is to do some level of engineering. What the cost estimating workbook does is it accounts for a lot of the unknowns. And the only way, we can start defining what actual right-of-way costs are, or utilities, and things of that nature are really, we basically just need to do some level of minimal design to define those things. And I know from our experience, I look at a project, Sliding Hill Road, where when we were still able to do PE only type projects, that project came in, just under the estimated cost, based upon that it was a 60% PE only project, and then went forward from there. I would be curious if this has been done. Has staff or has anybody looked at the workbook estimates versus actual cost? So in other words, taking projects that were based upon, that where does that fall? I'm looking at a couple that we're doing locally administered, and they seem to be coming in under the cost estimating workbook. Has that analysis been done?
No, since we haven't used it consistently long enough to have any projects that have gotten off the ground.
Right. So that's kind of that, so that's just one thing to consider. Again, not to totally undermine the cost estimating workbook, but before we put our full faith in the cost estimating workbook, it would be interesting to see, take some projects that were estimated using that, and then where did they fall relative to those estimates? And maybe that track record hasn't been developed yet, but I'd like to endorse the number 2 on the list, or B, the some level of design in developing cost estimates. Thank you.
Thank you for your input, Joe. All right, Barb, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm curious to kind of track construction workbook estimates and reality as we go along, but those are kind of new, so we probably don't have that data quite yet, but that'll be interesting to see. As far as requiring some level of PE before a project gets funded, what sources of funding, Joe, do you envision folks using for that?
Well, there are several options, I guess. One would be local funds, if they're available. I would, I'm just kind of thinking off the top of my head, but I think I would be open to using our TPO funding for that. So you would apply, again, kind of getting back to the PE only concept, where you would apply for a PE only application using one of those 2 sources, STPG or CMAQ.
I don't think those sources allow us to do PE only anymore.
Correct.
Yeah. So
Well, darn.
Smaller localities, I think, are going to struggle with being required to do preliminary engineering before submitting a CMAQ or STP application.
Understood. Good point.
So, yeah, Amy,
Yeah, I do think there needs to be a healthier level of design to get a better handle on the actual project. You know, when you look at transit projects, they're highly scrutinized. You know, they go through their sort of, you know, universe of alternatives, then down into selecting an alternative, then getting into your sort of conceptual design and refining it from there. We don't typically have as many problems. I'm not saying there aren't any problems, but there aren't these kinds of issues when you look at how transit projects are developed and delivered versus what highway projects, how they have been developed and delivered. So I think there's something to that. I think VDOT has set the precedent of not funding PE only phases now for what, you know, for obvious reasons. And I guess maybe the workbook hasn't been around long enough as it's currently defined in terms of its cost estimating, but we know what historically cost estimating has given us. That's what's gotten us to having 729, 120%, 4,400% cost increases, right? So, I mean, we know historically that the way we've been doing it and cost estimating it on the local level has gotten us into this situation. So why not go ahead and use a standard methodology through the VDOT workbook on at least the next round of project submissions to see where that gets us? Because we know what's been working doesn't work. I would rather it be a little more conservative on the front end and have a cost that's a little, you know, higher. Then we're not running into these. And I know we had this conversation yesterday, other solutions for that, maybe having a big pot of contingency, this and that, which has its own set of issues. Why not go ahead and put that on the actual project? And everybody's going to be on a level playing field, right? So everybody's going to have the same inflation and same cost assumptions.
thank you, Amy. And I know, yeah, that Smart Scale used the cost estimating workbook. I know, you know, that's not perfect, but it still leveled the playing field. And I think VDOT uses that for their estimates if they are administering the project. And, you know, Henrico used with this round of STBG CMAQ and used the cost estimating workbook. I was wondering if, with all this talk about the cost estimating workbook, VDOT, Nicole, are you on, or do you have any information to share from VDOT's perspective about some of these concerns that are being raised about the cost estimating workbook?
I mean, I think I agree with most of you from what I hear. I think the cost estimating workbook would level the playing field for everyone. I have been around long enough to go back and comment on previous rounds. If there are any specific questions, I'm happy to bring that up to my team and leadership and provide some answers.
Thank you, Nicole. Austin, then Barb, then Diana.
Thank you. I guess I do like the idea of kind of doing a review of the cost estimating workbook once we get enough data on it, but it hasn't been the standard long enough to have the data points. I think in my opinion, I don't think we have a choice but to go that route to essentially get the data point and then maybe consider another approach after we get projects to completion using the workbook.
With Austin, Barb?
I wanted to check in with VDOT on STARS and Project Pipeline, since those are opportunities to at least do a little bit of conceptual design on a project. I think there have been concerns expressed with the estimates that are coming out of those studies. You know, localities feeling like they have an estimate after one of those studies is completed, but then once it goes through the smart scale process, it is a lot different. But I've also heard that VDOT's trying to work on that and trying to get something a little bit firmer with the study. So I'm wondering whether VDOT has funding sources or is planning on doing more engineering through STARS or project pipelines so that people can get to a 10% or 30% design.
Yes, Barb, thank you for your comment. Regarding funding to get projects to a 10 or 30% design, I can ask Liz on that. But yes, I can confirm that going forward with STARS and pipeline studies, we're currently kicking off these studies, and we are looking for consultants to provide at the end of these studies to provide us with what we call the smart scale ready estimate and the estimates and the plans to come out with smart scale ready information.
Do you think that there's more money going towards those two initiatives? I don't know what to call them, STARS and Project Pipeline. Are those being expanded so that more projects can be vetted through those?
Not to my knowledge.
Yeah, I wish that would happen. I think that there are a lot of localities that would like to get projects through that program that just aren't getting the opportunity to do that.
Understood.
Tyrone?
Awesome. Thank you, Madam Chair. I guess I have two questions here. Hopefully they can move us along. I guess the first question is, I guess the first statement I'll make is that, you know, Richmond is amenable to the utilizing the cost estimating workbook. And looking at it, like some of us have said, in regard to at least being able to move there and then look at it in hindsight and then be able to decide if it actually is working. So I would ask that that consideration to be given, that we will review the use of this cost estimating workbook route or policy that we set, that we will review it. And then I just wanted to make sure I understood how cost increases would be considered under these programs. I think I heard scope changes would not, but just for clarification, what cost increases considerations would be given. And then finally, what is our action to okay these options for consideration? So I guess I'm just trying to get to, again, what we're being asked to do today.
So my understanding is to make a recommendation to TPO, for TAC to make a recommendation to TPO to what we recommend that they consider. These were options they gave us to consider, I guess, to choose. One, all, or come up with another option. So they're looking for direction, if it's, you know, one or two, or if we're leaning more towards one, use more conservative assumptions and with, you know, possibly, you know, maybe being the cost estimating workbook now with the condition that we review it, and then providing TPO with, you know, the reasons for the cost overruns on the other projects. So what we want to recommend to TPO of these options they gave us to consider. And I know you asked a question about cost increases. I'm not sure I can answer that. I'm not sure if Miles.
Yeah, I think I can address that. So during the Policy hasn't changed in terms of, up to 10% increase still goes through TAC for review and approval. Beyond that, it goes to the policy board. The changes have really been, I guess there's really two that we've made in that area. So one is that you can't change the project scope. So to avoid, taking Mayo Bridge, since it's come up, a project that started as really just fixing more of the decking side and then turning into a complete replacement of the superstructure. It's trying to keep the scope within what was selected originally.
And just for example, like what would be the solution? Would it be for the current dollars that was put on the smaller scope be pulled off and the locality resubmit for the larger scope?
Correct. So that would be it's either you advance the project that was selected, or if it's a big change like that, you'd have to go back through the scoring process. The other change that we've implemented was the thresholds.
One more question, sorry, Miles.
Okay, sure.
Rescoring process at an application open period, or just rescoring within the, you know what I mean? Like the current project cycle.
Yeah, so it would just be in the next application cycle. So if you would basically have to tell us, hey, we're not moving forward with that project as originally intended. We've decided we need to refine it and come up with a different scope to address the same issue, and then resubmit. And again, it's just because everything at this point has moved into a cost benefit analysis. If the cost is changing significantly, and the idea is kind of following with Smart Scale, that significant changes have to be reevaluated before they continue in the program.
And so one more question, sorry.
Okay.
The no scope change under these 5 or whatever considerations rather, where would the no scope change kind of fall into?
So that policy is already in place. So that was one that we've made a couple years ago.
But I mean, would we mention that as a way that we're reducing exposure?
I think what we would do is this slide of recent policy changes, we would present that to the board of, hey, we've already addressed some of these items. Here's the additional approaches that TAC would like to recommend to solve the problem.
And I'm saying that maybe we try to align these recent policy changes to the considerations. And then that kind of gives us where we're still maybe not making all of the considerations, or really like making sure we whether it is an other. I'm not sure what is an other right now, because I need to make sure I can align recent changes, what we're talking about. I got, for one, conservative assumptions is tied to the cost estimating workbook conversation. So I'm just trying to make sure that when we're talking like improved time to delivery, I don't know if that's the 30% design conversation. I'm just trying to, align what I'm hearing with, what we can agree on to recommend.
Thank you. And Chet, were you going to help answer the question? Or did you have another point?
I'll wait my turn.
Okay. Diana, I think you make a great point about going over those recent policy changes, and because some of that may not be factored into some of these legacy projects for why the overruns since they started. And that is one of the things we were proactively doing to try and get ahead of this with when we redid the STBG CMAQ process. And I think presenting that to the TPO2 is an excellent point. And we definitely don't need to do all 5 of these, 4 or 5 of these. You could do just one, or none, but or more. But go ahead, Nora.
You didn't need to cut off your point there.
Oh, no, that's okay. I need to hear from
Okay.
others. I need to stop talking. Go ahead.
Good. So I was really hoping that I was waiting for all of you to get your hands up, and I was hoping that the folks who have done this more would have answered all of these questions, and I could just say I agree with everything that you all said. But I'm not sure we came to an answer, so I just wrote down some thoughts. Miles, is there any way, or would there be any benefit to adding a column that has the date of when these projects started in the system or planning started. I know some of the comments have dates, but it would be nice to just reference a column because, you know, I know we have a Route 1 project and we talk about this every once in a while that started in 1997. So of course, it's going to be a massive increase. And so I think that tells a different story than a project that started getting funding in FY22 that's now doubled in price. So I don't know if that's a possibility. And I think this is something we'll tell over time, but it seems like the overestimating could potentially end up adding time to the projects, which then will end up adding cost to the projects. And so I don't know how you level that out. I know for us, and I hate to make this as an us situation, but this is how I'm visualizing it. We have a small sidewalk project and we were hoping to get some funds and we estimated it at like 600,000, which we thought was kind of high for this couple blocks of sidewalks. And VDOT, I think, had it at, I can't remember, like 1.6 or something astounding to us. And we were willing to locally administer it and say it's a $650,000 project. And I wonder if we, the localities, were willing to commit and say, okay, locally administered, this is the price we're asking for. We won't come back and ask for more, or we'll cover. I know there's usually a letter you can give to VDOT to say you'll cover the extra cost if it comes up. And so we'd be willing to do that because I feel like our project has a better chance of getting approved at that lower, what we think realistic amount is, as opposed to it scoring at 2.5 times the cost. Just something to think about. I don't have a strong opinion one way or the other. I would like to figure out a way to require some type of planning and design, because I know for our projects, that's what's usually ended up increasing the cost, is that we have a concept of what we want to do, maybe like a 2-block sidewalk. And then once we turn it over to VDOT, if it's a VDOT administered project, they're adding, you know, the right-of-way cost doubles, the construction cost triples, and just because they have other things they have to go through. And so if there's some way, and I think, except for on large, like our interstate projects, we probably couldn't cover that with local funds for the 10% or 30% plans. But I think we could, for our smaller projects, commit to funding those through like CVTA money. Again, that's just Ashland. I think those were my 4 points, and that's all. Thanks.
Thank you, Nora. This is a great discussion. Miles, I think Nora had a great idea about trying to maybe add a column to the spreadsheet with the date just to help others. And that kind of touches on what Amy mentioned before. Would you be able to do that? Just take from the PowerPoint presentation and add a column?
We can add post 2004. Any of the projects that are really, really legacy projects will need the localities to give an actual date, or we can just say pre 2004.
I'm comfortable with just saying pre 2004 and not trying. We're just based on what Plan RBA data is to be consistent. Others are comfortable with that as well. And Nora, I hear you about maybe if it's locally. So if we use the cost estimating workbook, still, if it's going to be locally administered, going back to maybe giving the locality the opportunity to administer it, if they would cover the delta. Some written, okay. Chet, and then Amy.
Thank you. I wanted to throw this out there. I can foresee questions from the policy board about the legacy projects in particular, because we have done a deep dive with at least Dr. Newbill and Mr. Williams. So they are aware of the impacts that that handful of projects has on the overall portfolio. So I think that the options for consideration here are great moving forward, but I'm not sure it really addresses a question if it comes up. So I think we just want to be prepared to offer some type of advice, or we're aware of it and we're trying to figure it out, or something like that from the TAC when those questions happen.
Thank you, Chad. Amy?
Sorry. Okay, I think this is really great discussion. Perhaps, we've had this discussion about, the dilemma that we're having with funding project development, early stages of project development. So really proper scoping, getting it to 30% design, or at least a level that we feel comfortable in the cost estimate. So what if a locality actually went ahead and put their own money up to do that project development work? Then when they submit that project for funding, maybe they would receive a higher score, right? I mean, maybe there's some incentive there for the localities to put up their local dollars, right, to do that. So that's something that we might be able to consider in terms of getting better project development activity. And then if a locality decides not to use the VDOT workbook, then like Nora was saying, then they're going to agree that if they have any cost increases as it relates to that project, then they're going to commit to funding locally those project costs, those cost increases. That may be one way of putting the onus back on the locality if they decide they want to go ahead and develop their own costs with their own more, I guess, conservative assumptions in terms of right of way and utility relocation, that sort of thing. And then I think the locality needs to demonstrate their availability in terms of their project management, right? Their ability to actually deliver the project as it is scoped. I think a lot of these projects, they're big projects and they require a lot of attention, and sometimes staff gets oversubscribed, and, before you know it, projects are, sort of lingering. And I think I think we've all experienced that at some point. So I think just really, if it's going to be a locally administered or even a VDOT administered, let's make sure VDOT has the resources to, to develop these projects and to administer them, because their project schedules, you're right, they're so long. I mean, they take a year for each phase, and it's really, we know why they're doing it, right? So that they don't, they don't promise more than they can actually give, and that's smart. But that does draw out the project. So maybe just having some commitment at some level that the projects can be delivered on time within the schedule. And then in terms of these legacy projects, I think we should see what they do, remove them from the program, and let's see how they score coming in as new projects. Like what we talked about, the one that's 4,400% over. That's a completely different project. And I have no idea what that cost is now, but I'm sure it's exorbitant. So how could the program even absorb that cost increase? So, I mean, I think, and I know that's sensitive because everybody has these legacy projects. And so I'm not saying that they're not worthy projects, but let's take a really close look at the TAC level as to why they aren't moving forward, and then get a commitment from the locality as to how they are going to deliver those projects. Otherwise, if that's not satisfactory, then they need to be removed from the program. I mean, that's kind of a hard way of looking at it, I guess, but this is money and it's tying up a lot of money. So that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Miles, did you have, or I saw you were unmuted for a moment. I know.
Sure. I was just going to add that with a lot of the legacy projects, there's outside funding on them. So it's not, even though the cost estimate has gone up, it's not necessarily that our contribution has gone up the same amount. So in the link that I provided earlier, it shows the change in TPO funding relative to change in total cost. So that's a portion of that. And then the other piece is most of them are ready for construction now. So we're finally getting to that last phase. So that's the other piece of it, is a lot of those ones that we talked about last month for the existing projects. 3 of those legacy projects that were in there that were recommended for funding were moving into construction and are finally wrapping up after a lengthy history. So I think that's the other piece of it that we'd have to consider.
Yeah, for sure.
Thank you, Miles. Austin?
Yeah, I think Goochland can probably get behind, using the cost estimating workbook with the caveat of if you want to not use that for a locally administered project, you do sign something that says you won't come back to the TPO for those additional funds if the cost overrun, if a cost overrun happens. But I don't think we can get into grading localities on staff availability and performance, because are we going to start penalizing Henrico or Chesterfield or Goochland for somebody putting in there 2 weeks and now they're down somebody? I don't think that's something we can or should ever really get into.
I agree. Yeah, Austin, with what you were saying. And then also just to touch on Dirona's point, just maybe, reviewing the cost estimating workbook, that caveat in there as well to see how it's performing.
Yeah.
What kind of a programming, I guess, how often would that be done? Every cycle? I don't know how to grade that. I guess it could just be a blanket statement that we will review it from time to time, I guess is how to phrase it.
I think so, because I don't think it's a set interval. Yeah.
I mean, it's the same frequency of we're reviewing all the other programs, right? I mean, we've been able to look historically at how, smart scale and the different programs and let a couple cycles go through and then look at it. But I just to follow up, since there are no other hands up, I agree. I'm not asking to score localities ability, but I do think we need to have some reasonable assurity that the projects can be delivered. I just wonder, and I'm sure there are reasons why projects went from locally delivered to VDOT delivered, right? And I guess the same would be true. So why? Was it that VDOT now could assume that project, or there were other reasons why, because they could handle the right of way? I mean, why did those changes occur? I don't know. We don't have to get into it. I'm just saying, we need to have some assurance that that's not going to happen, right? That projects aren't going to now increase and we're going to say, well, now we're going to give it to VDOT, and because it's a VDOT project, it's going to now need more money. Well, if it was locally developed and locally estimated, and for whatever reason, even if it does go over to VDOT, then if they're going to use those estimates, they're going to pay for those costs. It can't now come back and be saying, oh, well, it was VDOT cost now because it's a VDOT project, so it's gone up. So I guess that's my question is, let's make sure the project really is where it needs to be in the beginning. And if it can be delivered locally, then let's let it be delivered locally. If it needs to be VDOT, let it go to VDOT. You know what I mean? But I'm seeing a lot of these are saying, well, now it's become a VDOT project, so it's more expensive. So I think that's not an excuse.
And maybe just in regard to that question, I know in the grant applications, and Miles, please add on if I misstate anything, when we apply for CMAQ or STBG, I think there's a checkbox that says, are you planning to be locally administered or VDOT administered? And so I think the localities are selecting it then. I'm not sure what was done way in the past, but that's what's currently done. And maybe there's just another check before like awarding new funding that, we confirm before it's awarded that it's whether it's going to be local or VDOT when refining the estimate.
Yeah, and I'll add, for our purposes, that's just been related to the programming of, whose estimate are we using when advancing the project. We pencil it in there, but ultimately until you get a project agreement in place, that's up in the air. So that's, we can make an assumption, but we'll never know for sure until down the road.
Joe, you patiently have been waiting. Go ahead.
Yes, thanks. Just to add to that, when for any of these projects that would be funded through the TPO that would be locally administered, we are required to submit an RTA, a request to administer, and that gets vetted pretty heavily by VDOT to look at the locality's track record and capability of being able to administer a project. So I think kind of in response to some of the concerns that Amy was raising, that is looked at fairly closely in terms of, is a locality able to locally administer or not? And some of that, I believe, is based upon your past track record, because we are required to list previous projects that have been locally administered and delivery dates and that type of thing.
Thank you, Joe. And I know I made a proposal to put this as an action item. In Austin, I see your hands raised.
I was just about to ask if the chair would entertain a motion.
Yes, the chair would like to entertain a motion.
Okay. I move that the policy revision TAC sends to the policy board or recommends to the policy board is to use the VDOT cost estimating workbook for all estimates. And if a locality chooses not to use the cost estimating workbook, that they agree to not come back to the TPO for any additional funds. And we agree to review the cost estimating workbook from time to time as far as performance.
Second.
One second, yeah. One second.
I think I heard second from Joe first, Amy, but unless somebody heard different, okay. Any discussion, Nora? I see your hands raised.
Yes, so this motion just covers the cost estimation. Do we need to make recommendations on any of these other items? No, okay.
No, and I think Miles will still, well, with the presentation to the TPO, it'll still go over what we talked about of what we're currently doing proactively in the previous slide to address some of these concerns, and we'll still present the reasons for the cost overruns for the existing projects, as well as adding the year or pre-2004 is my understanding. All right, any other discussion before we take a roll call vote?
I hate to do this, but just, so one of the things the issues that this may create is basically this allows for reverse leveraging, if you will. So in other words, if you were so inclined to underestimate your project cost as it's being scored, presumably it would score higher. And then if it did actually come in, the actual cost come in higher than you had committed, just, we're going to use our cost. Then on the back end, we would fund the difference. So in other words, kind of using those monies on the back end as kind of a sense to leverage to improve your score. That's a flaw that I see in this, but we wouldn't do it. But, and I'm not suggesting others would, but it does open up that possibility to really tighten up your estimates during that application process if you were going to fund the back end, if it went over.
Joe, Amy?
So I guess for clarification, my thought is what the motion was is that if a locality chooses to develop their own costs for their project and it is scored and awarded at that cost, that locality will not be eligible for any additional regional, state, federal funding. They have to cover that with local money, right? So
no, the motion was that, at least my intent for the motion was that if you develop your own estimate and use it for the application, you cannot come back to the TPO for either CMAQ or STBG funds.
Okay.
So not tying it directly to, you have to come up with another funding source, just not TPO administered funds.
Okay, so.
Because I think asking it to be locally funded for certain projects given some unknowns that may exist on projects, is, I think, too much to say it has to be local.
Okay, well then I will withdraw my support for that because I think it's, it just, like, I think what Joe is saying, that it's just we're gonna have to fund these projects then over in other pots that's already oversubscribed. So the incentive for localities to use the standard workbook would be that they're not, that if they're higher, then they'll be eligible for, these funding pots, whether it's, RSTP or CMAQ. I know we're not in the CBTA space right now, but I think we can't ignore that. Because that's where people are going to go, right? And that's already oversubscribed. So this would just set that up. So I would not be supportive of that. If the locality chooses to, I would be supportive of, if the locality chooses to do their own costs, then they're signing up for any cost overruns, or they can, withdraw their project and resubmit it and score it and with the new estimate. Otherwise, I think what Joe was saying is correct. It's just going to set us up for unintentional consequences.
Barb?
So you all are proposing that no one could go after other funding sources if a project estimate increases, even though those other funding sources are competitive.
That's not my understanding. Well, that's not what I thought Austin was proposing in his.
Yeah, that's not the motion. Barb, are you asking what Amy and Joe were getting at?
Yeah, right. I think that's what Amy was saying, that you would not be able to close the gap on a project even if you submitted it in a competitive program, which all the other funding sources are competitive, unless you're using your local dollars.
And I think to that point, I don't know how or what authority this body would have to prohibit you from using any other funding source. I don't necessarily think that's in. I do think it may be an unintended consequence, but from the TPO policy board, put the TPO blinders on, they're concerned about TPO dollars being over leveraged. So I think if it's an unintended consequence, maybe we review it again in a year after a funding cycle, and maybe it's just rampant of the unintended consequence kind of gone wild. But I think it's a good way to limit TPO dollar from being over leveraged.
Oh, am I able to call the question?
Sure.
Yeah, there's a motion on the table, so.
Well.
1 second.
Or before the question, can I make sure I know the motion again?
Yeah, so
Austin, would you do your best to repeat that? And
let me recap here. So the motion, as I think I relayed it, is that the cost estimating workbook shall be used for cost estimates. If a locality chooses not to go with the cost estimating workbook and provides their own estimate, then that locality is not eligible for additional TPO funds on that particular project. And we also agree to review cost estimating workbook performance from time to time to see how it is actually doing. So that's the motion and the gist. I hope I explained it.
okay, and so we have, and sorry, you said the call to the question. So I guess Barb, you wanted to propose another motion, but we already have a motion on the floor, unless I'm misinterpreting.
No, I just wanted to vote.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's, Ms. Firestone, would you please call the roll? Thank you for clarifying, Barb. For call for vote, roll call vote.
I apologize. I was muted. I'm sorry.
No, thank you.
Can I just ask who made the second for that motion?
I believe that was Joe.
I thought I had Joe, but I just wanted to confirm. Ms. Amos,
Aye.
Mr. Mitchell, Ms. Smith,
Aye.
Mr. Goin,
Aye.
Mr. Valdez,
Aye.
Chair Smidler,
Aye.
Ms. Inman,
Aye.
Ms. Clark,
Aye.
Ms. Jabinsky,
Aye.
Mr. Robinson, Ms. Robinson,
Aye.
Mr. Parsons,
Aye.
Mr. O'Keefe,
Aye.
Ms. Mueller.
Aye.
Thank you. That motion carries.
And Madam Chair, can we circle back to Mr. Mitchell and Mr. Robinson to see if
Yes,
they're able
please.
to unmute?
Mr. Mitchell, are you with us?
Or would you be able to put something in the chat if your microphone's not working? If that would be acceptable.
It was worth a shot. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, thank you for that suggestion coming back. So not hearing anything from Mr. Mitchell and I think Mr. Robinson, did that pass, Janice, or?
It did. We actually have Miss Robinson with us from GRTC. So yes. Mhm.
Great.
I'm here too, Corey Robinson as well.
Okay. So thank you. If that's the end of that agenda item, thank you everyone for your patience. We have a lot of experienced, intelligent people on this call and who are willing to help. And I appreciate the conversation about this. Next on the agenda is number 11, draft fiscal year 24 to fiscal year 27 TIP and regional conformity assessment. This is an action item. TAC is requested to approve the opening of a public comment period on the draft TIP and conformity assessment. Mr. Bushing will be presenting, and this would be a roll call vote.
Thank you again, Madam Chair. I promise to make this one a little quicker. So as you all know, the draft TIP has been under development since this past summer. We've been coordinating with the localities to get projects and to review the project lists. We are also required to conduct a regional conformity assessment to demonstrate compliance with the 1997 8-hour ozone maintenance area that was in this region previously. As you know, we held the interagency consultation immediately before the TAC meeting, and that moved things forward to the TAC. So the TAC has to approve opening a public comment period for 30 days on the draft conformity and the draft TIP. The 30-day period is defined by our public engagement plan. So that is, adopted policy to do 30 days on this. And we've actually aligned it with Tri-Cities as well. So it's going to be the entire Richmond urbanized area that will be conducting reviews of the TIP and conformity at the same time. And the policy board has authorized TAC to open this period. So our engagement strategy for this public comment period is really 4 steps. So if you'll recall, in our public engagement plan, there's a matrix that defines all these different tools we can use for different purposes, if we're trying to get input, if we're trying to just spread awareness. So we pulled from that matrix to develop this. But essentially the 4 are holding public meetings. So everything that we do is held at a public meeting that's open for public comment. So that's kind of the bare minimum allowing comment on the projects. We have a mailing and email list which has interested parties, and we will be using that to spread awareness of the public engagement opportunity that's available. We are going to be holding an open house. So the date right now is April 5th, and it'll be here at the Plan RVA offices. It'll be an evening meeting. And that'll be advertised in the newspapers. It will also be promoted on social media and shared with all of our locality and agency partners as well to promote. So that's just an opportunity, kind of like we did with the LRTP, to go through each project, just talk about the process in general. Why are we here? What are we doing? So anyone who's interested has a chance to learn more. And then the last piece is our website. So we've set up a new website for the TIP. This is something that's kind of been a long-standing desire from the TPO. So our peer agencies in Hampton Roads and Northern Virginia have TIP databases, and they've been managing that. We try to take that a step farther and really do our TIP as a web-first document. So I'm going to share that just as a quick overview of what we have available. So this is the draft TIP website. So this is the homepage, just a quick overview of the TIP, snapshot of what's in there. And you can view the draft documents in the PDFs. So the PDFs are available. You can read through them just like we normally would do. We have also developed a database. So you can search in here and pull up projects by UPC. You can look up all the safety projects based on the scope. You can look up anything that's in one of the localities. You could look up projects on a specific road system. So there's a lot of flexibility. You can search by project name. So when you pull up the projects, it's basically the TIP pages that we've had in previous versions of the TIP. So you have all the standard project information. You have interactive maps that you can zoom in, scroll around, look at satellites, look at street map. Consistency with all of our long-range transportation planning goals, your planned obligations, as well as an explanation of each of the funding sources that are on there and what they mean. Any TIP amendments that are approved will go on here as well. And then there's a comment form to directly comment on each project. So if you have a concern about a specific project, we know exactly which project you're talking about. Makes it easier. We've also got the ability to search by map. So you can pull up a project and actually pull it up this way so you can see what's around you. And then we have the other sections that are in the TIP. So we have the financial plan, all the tables showing available revenues and how much we're expecting to program, and a breakdown of how those were developed and the funding sources again. We also have all of our performance measures. So performance-based planning is a requirement. So this breaks down all our performance targets and all of the projects and funding that are going toward meeting those goals. And that goes across all of our performance areas as well. We also, under air quality, we're not required to adopt CMAQ standards, but we do have a link to the conformity report here again, so you can comment directly on conformity and air quality assessment. And then there's just a general comment form. So comments are accepted at any point. You can comment on here and it'll come back to us. So that's during this new development process or into the future. So that's been the approach this time around. So we have more of a web forward public facing the document itself. It's more of just the VDOT STIP blocks. So it's more, the generic blocks that we see when we get the TIP amendments. So the focus this time around has been on preparing something that is publicly accessible and publicly viewable. These two will be kept closely linked. Obviously, changes made to one will be made in the other. But this is more of the public outreach side, whereas the TIP document is the one that's submitted and ultimately meeting all the requirements. And there are two items that are still missing from the TIP that we did want to let the TAC know about that will need to be added before next week. So there are two projects that are non-federal that were locally submitted that need to be in the TIP. They're CVTA funded, but they are regionally significant. They were included in the air quality conformity assessment. They're in that project list, but we're still working on VDOT on how those STIP blocks need to be generated. Those will be added before we open the public comment period next week. But unfortunately, we haven't been able to get those STIP blocks included at this time. So those two projects are the Magellan Parkway extension and the Woolridge Road extended. So again, mostly CVTA funded projects. and we'll have to add those into the draft document. But we did want to make sure that TAC was aware that there weren't any surprises when those projects got added. So the action that we're requesting, as I mentioned, is to open the 30-day public comment period. So this would allow staff to move forward with the public review, and it would be concurrent for both documents, the conformity assessment and the draft tip, and that would open next week. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions. I'm sure there'll be some on the 2 non-federal projects.
Great update, Miles. And I just want to second what Joe Vidunas put in the chat. He said, excellent job on the TIP webpage. I agree. I mean, that looks great. I love the map and the interactive and the comment and being able to be specific so they can see something tangible. Great work. Yeah, please, when that's open, please share that with TAC. I'd be happy to share that with the Henrico social media, or, Plan RVA shares it. Great job. Barb's hand's raised. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. That interactive tip web page is fabulous. And I was wondering who worked on that.
That was me. So
Just
I
you?
built that. Yeah.
Wow.
So that's our we decided last year that we wanted to move forward with this. So we kind of spent the tip development period focusing on the website.
Yeah, it's really good. You did great work. We have been also trying to get the POITE into the tip. Is that on the table too?
So that's a separate conversation. For the current tip, the proposal, and we haven't brought this to the full TAC yet, but the proposal is to add an illustrative project section. So that is essentially a vision plan within the tip, just like we have a vision plan within the long-range transportation plan. So it's projects that aren't funded. We can't put them in because they're not constrained, they're not fully funded, but they're a priority if we can get funding. And really the intent with that is to support future discretionary grant applications.
Yeah, that's right. I forgot about that. Okay.
So that
Thank
should
you.
be on your agenda for next month.
Yep.
Any questions for Miles? Hearing none, would anyone like to make a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve.
A second from anyone?
Jarana, second.
Great job, Ryan.
I assume no discussion. Oh wait, this is a roll call vote. Sorry, Janice, would you please take a roll call vote?
Yes, ma'am. Miss Amos,
Aye.
Mr. Mitchell, Ms. Smith,
Aye.
Mr. Goin,
Aye.
Mr. Vidunas,
Aye.
Chair Smidler,
Aye.
Ms. Inman,
Aye.
Ms. Clark, Ms. Juvinski,
Aye.
Ms. Robinson,
Aye.
Mr. Parsons,
Aye.
and Ms. Mueller.
Aye.
Thank you. The motion carries.
Thank you. We have one more update before we get to agency updates. On the agenda is number 12, fiscal year 24 to fiscal year 29, STBG CMAQ allocations. This was one with the amended agenda that we changed it to an informational item. And Mr. Bushing, it's your turn again.
Thank you again, Madam Chair. So this item was originally scheduled to be an action item. So our intent was originally to bring the draft allocations plans, transfers, and new project selection to the TAC for review. However, on Friday, we received the updated budgets for the programs. And another piece of that, we got the new funding program, which is the carbon reduction program, which is part of the IIJA. So that adds a whole nother pot of funding and really changes our ability to select new projects, and we don't have a criteria in place yet. So the staff wanted to take a little extra time, review project eligibilities, and provide a better recommendation. In total, from the changes to RSTP and CMAQ and the new carbon reduction, we have almost $22 million in funding beyond what we thought when we did our baseline estimates earlier this year. So it really changes the project selection ability. Quick overview about carbon reduction program. So this is a new program from the IIJA, Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, but it basically is dedicated to reducing greenhouse gas emissions from the transportation sector. So it's similar to CMAQ. We have to demonstrate that a project is going to reduce emissions, and there's a few extra categories that are specifically called out that are not eligible for CMAQ. VDOT's recommendation right now is to use it to augment the CMAQ program, adding additional funding to that pot. The quick review of the eligibilities also shows that it is eligible for anything that's eligible for RSTP, as long as you can also demonstrate that it will reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So there's a lot of flexibility as long as we're reducing those emissions. So the focus here is going to be on demonstrating an ability to reduce the carbon emissions. So staff needs more time to get a handle on all of that and to review the current project selection and make a recommendation. Update for each of the funding sources. So this is the RSTP program. You can see we had just under 2.2 million in additional funding beyond what we thought was available. So originally we estimated about 18.2 million. So there's the extra 2.2 million beyond that, which again makes a difference between adding an extra project to that program potentially. CMAQ had a much larger pot than we were expecting. A lot of previous funding and closeouts have occurred. So we have 3.5 million more than we were expecting on the CMAQ side, which brings us up to, I think, right around 10 million in unallocated funds that we need to look at. And then the carbon reduction program, which is the bulk of the funding. So between previous and all the way through 29, we're looking at over $16 million of funding. So staff needs to take a look and determine the best approach. I think the previous funding and potentially FY24, we definitely want to get those put onto projects as quickly as possible. The out years, I think we have more time as a MPO to decide what's the best approach to using these funds. So I think staff is going to be looking into this to prepare a recommendation for next month for the TAC. So again, our next steps are really just looking at the eligibilities for the carbon reduction program and then providing the recommendations on allocations. Our update next month will be the full allocations plans that were originally intended for this month, but reflecting the additional revenues that are now available. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Interesting update, Miles. Thank you. Dirona, go ahead.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Miles, quick question. So is the CRP being looked at for the applications submitted in this past CMAQ and potentially RSTP process, or will it be a new process?
So that's part of what we have to determine with this. I think the priority would be distributing essentially the previous funding. So I think even FY24 we can sit on a little bit and figure it out, but money from FY23 we probably want to move as quickly as possible so we can obligate it and continue moving forward. So staff's going to have to look into options and see what projects it could potentially go on from the current pool, and then how we want to go through a project selection process, because we don't have criteria yet for how to allocate these funds. So that's going to be part of what we're going to try and determine over the next month.
Thank you.
And if I may, Madam Chair, I just want to add, if anyone has any recommendations or suggestions that they'd like to send, please just email me, because again, this is a brand new program that we don't have any policy in place for right now.
Thank you, Miles. It's exciting to hear about some additional funding opportunities. All right, so that leads us into item number 13 on the agenda, which is transportation agency updates. DRPT, Ms. Dubinsky.
Thank you so much. So I'll be very brief this month because the policy board got a full update from Director DeBrule. But this is a note for more MPO staff. Our FY24 Section 5303 applications, they were released onto Olga as of March 1st. And the deadline is May 1st for submission. Staff should have gotten an email with allocations this year. And in general, just for everyone's knowledge, there was roughly about between 18 to 20% increase, which was pretty much happy across the board. If you have questions about the application, access to Olga or anything of that nature, please feel free to reach out to me. Otherwise, the only other thing I would like to note is that as we're working on our 6-year improvement program, there's also opportunities for federal discretionary grants. Mostly that's of interest to our transit agencies, but as we were just talking about earlier about any kind of competitive funding and grant opportunities, there are also planning grants that are available either through DRPT, even though our grant application window just closed, but also through FTA, they do have planning grants that are available. So if you are interested in kind of exploring some of those opportunities, please feel free to reach out. But we did host a webinar on February 15th. The recording is available on the DRPT YouTube page. And we are always welcome to provide any technical assistance or letters of support related to any kind of discretionary grant application. And with that, that's my update.
Thank you. Any questions for DRPT? Hearing none, we will move on to GRTC. Ms. Robinson?
Well, it'd actually be me, Mr. Robinson. Couple quick updates. We installed a new double shelter at West Broad Street and Pump Road in Henrico. So we'd like to thank our partners over in Henrico County for supporting us with that and laying the concrete pad to make way for this essential transit infrastructure installation. This is the third shelter installation in Henrico since the beginning of the year, so that's exciting. Another update is Friday is Transit Driver Appreciation Day. So GRTC and National Express, our paratransit provider, will be showing our appreciation for all of our operators. So keep an eye out for a special destination sign on all our buses that say, "We appreciate our bus operators." And then in regards to the downtown transfer station, GRTC expects to start operations testing, training, and emergency drills at the downtown transfer station at the end of this month or the beginning of next month in preparation for our opening in late May. And that is all I have for our update.
Any questions for Mr. Robinson? Hearing none, yes, thank you, GRTC. We're excited about that West Broad shelter being put in and VDOT for helping us with the land use permit. Next, Ride Finders, Mr. O'Keefe had to step out, but he will email his updates to Ms. Firestone and they will be included in the meeting minutes for members to see. Next is VDOT, Ms. Mueller.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I don't have a lot of new information for you today, so I'll keep it brief and highlight a few things. At the February CTB workshop, the board received presentations on the Smart Scale program review, the urban and county street maintenance payments, and a VTrans update. During the action meeting, the board approved the latest 6-year improvement program transfers and the additions of projects to the SYIP. They also approved the 3rd and 4th quarter payments for maintenance to certain roads and streets. That includes payments to the town of Ashland, the city of Richmond, and Henrico County. The next workshop meeting will take place in the VDOT auditorium on March the 28th at 10 a.m. and the action meeting will be on the next day on March 29th at 9 a.m. I don't have any new information on Smart Scale since my update last month. At this point, we're all awaiting the final approval of applications, or what we call the consensus funding scenario that should be recommended for funding by the CTB in June. Moving on to the development of the new 6-year improvement program. We don't have a schedule on the CTB webpage yet, but I can give you a heads up. This is hot off the press from this morning. The Richmond District public hearing is tentatively scheduled for Monday, April the 24th from 4 to 6. Again, that's April the 24th from 4 to 6. Dates can change, but I think you can pencil this one in your calendar. And last but not least, Fall Line Trail, the Fall Line Trail Work Group met on March the 1st. VDOT provided an update on alignment alternatives and challenges. We are considering pros and cons on all alternatives. Our presentation is available on Plan RVA's website, but I can also email it directly to you if you would like to take a look at it. Just let me know. And that's my update.
Thank you, Nicole. And what was the April 24th meeting from 4 to 6? What public meeting was that for again?
That will be for the new 6-year improvement program. Okay. That's the Richmond District public hearing.
Gotcha. Thank you for that. All right. Any questions for VDOT? All right. Hearing none, that leads us to agenda item number 14, future meeting topics. Well, we can check off project cost estimates. That was one of them for now, and we will add the one for the STBG CMAQ allocations and the new carbon funding, and then there's some other things in here about a regional public transportation plan, DRPT Virginia statewide rail plan, and CVTA project prioritization updates, as well as transit modernization study updates. And if there's any other future meeting topics that you can think of, please let us know now, or feel free to reach out to Chet or I. Next, item 15 is TAC member comments. Any comments?
And hi, Sharon.
Hi, Nora. Go ahead.
Sorry, I'm on another meeting and I can't make it mute, so I'm going to put my phone over here so you can't hopefully hear it. I just wanted to quickly say, because I don't think I heard it covered in the GRTC update, that we are moving forward on our micro transit project and applications. We're very excited about it. And this month we're holding some stakeholder meetings to try to figure out locations and timing for the on-demand service. So very excited about that. A lot of work went into it over the past few years, and it's nice to see it coming hopefully to fruition.
Yes, those microtransit studies are very exciting, I think, and create some more opportunities for folks. Thanks for the update, Nora, and comment. All right, hearing no other comments from TAC members, the next meeting is scheduled for April 11th. We'll plan to meet virtually at 9 a.m. This meeting is considered adjourned. It is 11:06. Hope everyone has a nice day. Thanks so much. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.